Welcome to the third episode of our podcast. Let me and my team from XMUM Rescuer to introduce ourselves to you all. I'm Jin Yong. I'll be today moderator for our podcast. And now I will let my teammates to introduce themselves to you all.
Hi everyone, I'm Jai.
Hello, I'm Donovan.
Hello, I am Leong Hao.
Hello.
Hello guys, I'm Ewan.
Thank you guys for introducing yourself. Today our podcast theme is how to prevent and protect ourselves from infectious diseases. What are actually infectious diseases? Infectious diseases are actually disorders caused by organisms such as bacteria, virus, fungi, or parasites. Normally, these organisms that live in our bodies are harmless or even helpful to us. But in certain situations, some organisms may cause diseases due to the process of mutations. So, I was really curious, did anyone here experience natural disaster like infectious diseases before? Please feel free to share your experience with us.
Okay, so I actually had a very personal experience with COVID before. So I caught it about half a month ago. So at first I thought it was a cold because it was just only about coughing. But however, it escalated to having more severe symptoms like having a stuffy nose and sometimes shortness of breath. So it got serious to a point where I went and did a PCR test and the results came back positive. So I was actually really scared and afraid because COVID is known to affect everyone differently. So I did my best to stay calm, take medicine as usual, and just eat and drink normally. But I couldn't taste anything as well, so it was kind of difficult for me. Although I am better now, but there's still after effects which still come and go like that. So yeah, that was my experience with COVID.
Okay, thank you, Jai, for sharing us your story regarding your own experience on COVID-19 pandemics. Besides COVID-19, did anyone else wanted to share other examples of spread infectious diseases that attack mankind in a few decades?
Yes, I would like to share some examples of infectious diseases. Besides COVID-19, there are also other examples of spread infectious disease that attack our world in a few decades. For instance, there is the most deadly infectious disease is the Black Death, with 200 million deaths. This type of infectious disease is usually transmitted by fleas, and the site of the flea bite will be red, swollen, painful, and usually have a fever in the confirmed patient. Currently, it is still possible to contract this infection disease, but it can be cured. Another example is AIDS, which can be considered the worst kind of virus because symptoms take a long time to appear and the death rate is high. The main reason is it spreads so quickly is that people who are infected do not necessarily know they have the virus. But with advance in the global public health movement, the rate of AIDS infection growth has lowered. Even so, there are still 40 million AIDS deaths. So that's all my part. Thank you.
Thank you, Donovan, for sharing us the examples of spread diseases that put mankind on risk for a few decades. After knowing the examples of infectious diseases, now we'll be talking about how these infectious diseases transmit across the globe. Did anyone here know the ways of transmission of infectious diseases?
Okay, yes, I know about it. And there are two different ways in this issue. And first is the direct contact. It's an easy way to catch most infection disease is by coming in contact with a person or animal with the infection. Infection disease can spread through direct contact such as person to person. And infectious disease commonly spread through the direct transfer of bacteria, viruses, or other germs from one person to another. And this can happen when an individual with the bacterium or virus touch, kiss, or cough or sneeze on someone who isn't infected. And these germs can also spread through the exchange of body fluids from sexual contact. The person who passed the germ may not have no symptoms of the disease, but it may simply be a carrier. And for the direct contact, second part is the animal to person. So being bitten or scratched by an infected animal So such as your pet can make you sick and in extreme circumstances, it can be fatal. So handling animal waste can be hazardous too. So for example, you can get toxoplasmosis infection by scooping your cat litter box. And in third is the mother to unborn children. So a pregnant woman may pass germs that cause infection disease to her unborn baby. Some germs can pass through the placenta or through the breast milk, and germs in the vagina can also be transmitted to the baby during the birth. So for this part, the second contact way is the indirect contact, such as insect bite or food contamination. So disease-causing organisms also can be passed by indirect contact. Many germs can linger on inanimate objects such as tabletop, doorknob, or faucet handle. And when you touch the doorknob handle by someone ill with flu or a cold, so you can pick up the germs he or she left behind. And if you touch your eye, mouth, or nose before washing your hands, you may be infected. So for this part, the insect bites, some germs relies on insect carriers such as mosquito, flies, lice, or ticks to move from host to host. And these carriers are known as vectors. For example, mosquito can carry the malaria or West Nile virus. For the food contamination, disease-causing germs can also infect you through the contaminated food and water. And this mechanism of transmission allows germs to spread to many people through a single source. So for example, E. coli is a bacterium present in or certain foods, such as undercooked hamburger or unpasteurized fruit juice. So that's all for my sharing about this issue, and thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks, Leong Hao, for your clear and detailed explanation regarding the ways of transmission of infectious diseases. So now we'll be moving on to the third section of our podcast, which is the discussion about the ways of identifying an infections, as well as when to see a doctor for medical treatments and consultations. So, Kai-Shun, did you have any ideas regarding these topics?
Yeah, of course. I did some research how to identify an infection. There are some few symptoms. Each infectious disease has its own specific signs and symptoms, but general signs and symptoms common to a number of infectious disease includes like fever, diarrhea, fatigue, muscle aches, and coughing. But the most important one is when you identify these symptoms, but there are other cases when you need to know when to see a doctor. Seek medical attention if you have been bitten by an animal, are having trouble breathing, have been coughing for more than a week, have severe headache with fever, experience rash or swelling, have unexplained or prolonged fever, have sudden visual problems. These are all the medical attention you need to seek when you have this problem. Okay, so thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kai-Shun, for sharing us your 5 cents worth of opinions regarding these discussions. Now, finally, we will be moving on to our last section of today's podcast, which is the discussion about the ways to prevent spread of infectious diseases. There are actually all kinds of methods to prevent ourselves from infectious diseases. Thus, did anyone here wanted to share some info regarding these discussions?
Yes, I would like to share some info on this topic. So here are some tips to stay healthy and decrease the risk of infection. First, wash your hands. This is especially important before and after preparing food, before eating, and after using the toilet. And try not to touch your eyes, your nose, or your mouth with your hands, as there's a common way germs enter the body. Second, get vaccinated. Vaccinations can reduce your chances of contracting many diseases. Make sure to keep up to date on your recommended vaccinations, as well as your children's. Third, stay home when ill. If you have a fever or think you may be getting sick, just stay home. Don't go to work if you are vomiting, have diarrhea, or have a fever. And also, don't send your child to school if he or she has these signs. Next, prepare food safely. Keep counters and other kitchen surfaces clean when preparing meals. Cook foods to the proper temperature using a food thermometer to check for dampness. Also, don't let cooked foods remain at room temperature for a long period of time. Next, practice safe sex. Always use condoms if you or your partner has a history of sexually transmitted infections or high-risk behavior. Also, don't share your personal items. Use your own toothbrush, comb, and razor. Avoid sharing drinking glasses or dining utensils. Lastly, travel wisely. If you are traveling out of the country, talk to your doctor about any special vaccination, such as yellow fever, hepatitis A or B, or typhoid fever you may need. So working together, we can all help keep our community free from germs and prevent the spread of disease. That's all from me. Thank you. I will pass it back to Jinyo.
Thank you, Evan, for your useful sharing on ways of prevention against infectious diseases. In the last section of our podcast, in this episode of our podcast, we had shared some really useful information regarding on how to protect ourselves from infectious diseases. So I really hope that our podcast will be able to build awareness on how to save ourselves from virus attacks among society today to reduce the risks and disruptions of infectious diseases on mankind. Thank you for listening to our podcast. I will officially end our podcast now. Before that, dear fellow viewers, remember to like, subscribe, and share our podcast channel for further information regarding on how to protect ourselves from natural disaster. And remember to stay tuned to our next episode of our podcast, which is about how to save yourself from fire disaster. Thank you. Thank you, guys.